I'm really happy to have Meg up with me today. And I came across her work when she found the Twitter thread I did on tips for men looking for a good wife. And it was relatively countercultural because it said that looks aren't the most important thing. Instead, men need to look out for chastity, modesty, and whether she's respectful of her father. And Mega left a comment saying it was a good set of tips. And I thought this was so rare to have a woman who appreciates my content. I would look into what her thoughts about things are. And I think you're going to find this a fascinating interview because, if anything, she's probably even more countercultural than I am. So great to speak to you, Mega.
Thanks for inviting me, Will.
So tell me a bit about your journey onto social media then. You're active on Twitter. You've got a YouTube channel now too. You're on Instagram. What motivated this?
So my main activity online is writing. I joined Twitter because I wanted to share my thoughts and ideas, and I thought it was a really fun writing platform because of the limited word count. Um, and I loved saying things or figuring out answers to questions that we weren't necessarily allowed to ask in mainstream society because it would ruffle some feathers. But, as time wore on, I became more and more enmeshed in the online writing. I used to be in a PhD program, and they basically made it clear to me that I wasn't invited there anymore because I had written an essay on my Substack about the fact that I was against abortion and the reasons why, among other reasons. And so after that, I got married. And then, so I just decided to focus completely on my writing because I found a lot of people resonating with the way that I worded my ideas or the way that I dissected a complex social problem. And so my main content is my Substack, and then I also post my writing on Instagram, and I also teach art and literature to people of all ages around the world who want to learn, because I think the arts really teach us how to think critically about the world and have most influenced the way that I interact with the world, even though I come from a heavy science background.
That's really fascinating because not many people see the arts as anything else other than escapism. But Schopenhauer, for example, says that the artist is doing in concrete form what the philosopher is doing in abstract form. So you're engaging with some of the deepest questions about life. And that's what I found as a teacher of literature until I was sacked for something which was prepared as a lecture at the college, but was also on social media on YouTube. So we're similar in that respect. And I agree that art is one of the most powerful ways, whether it's the plastic arts, whether it's painting, whether it's poetry, of getting people to bump up against the real fundamental questions of life.
I think Schopenhauer said it so perfectly, and I would distinguish escapism from art in like one major way. When you are finished with something that is escapism, like you finished playing a video game, or you finished listening to pop music or anything like that, you feel an emptiness inside, or like a Netflix TV show that was kind of throwaway. Whereas when you finish with a work of art, like you went to a beautiful music concert or you read an amazing book, you feel more enriched after you're done, and it stays in your mind for weeks and weeks after.
Much of your writing on the arts, I've noticed, has the same countercultural message as your tweets do. And one of the things you said that really struck me is that Romeo and Juliet is about the dangers of passion, about the dangers of simping, to put it bluntly. And there's so many teenagers studying that play, thinking that this is an idealized presentation of love. And it seemed to me that your comment there about Romeo and Juliet being about the destructive force of teenage infatuation was something that most people go through school never having considered.
I think that just comes down to our poor literature education in schools that, people don't read through the whole play. They don't discuss everything in it. They just gloss over the most famous scenes, and they're never actually challenged to think critically about it. When I read Romeo and Juliet, like everybody else, when I was 14, I understood the same things that everyone else in the mainstream understood about it. And it was only later when I read it again that I focused on the ending of the play a lot more. And it took me back to Act 2, Scene 2, when it's the famous balcony scene. I read it again with fresh eyes, where Romeo is committing all kinds of blasphemy when he is praising Juliet. And I realized the play is actually about the dangers of idolatry, because and even Juliet was actually one of the smartest characters that Shakespeare has written, because she even warns him about the dangers of this idolatry and this blasphemy that Romeo is committing in his praises of her. And the end of the play, the after the couple has died, the townspeople proclaim that it was the fact that they idolized each other too much that was the cause of their death. And if they had tempered their love or their passions and been more strategic with how they pursued it, they might have found happiness. But then the townspeople never actually learn, because they make a golden statue of Romeo and Juliet at the end that they begin to worship. So they continue to. So Shakespeare is telling us something interesting about human nature, that we can't get away from idolization of things that should not be idolized, that should be kept in their proper place. I think simping is kind of a form of this idolatry, because you put too much into the other person, and then you have expectations of them that they can't fulfill, and you also abdicate your self-respect in the process, which ironically destroys any chance of attraction that you could have built.
Yeah, that's a really articulate answer, and it leads into what I wanted to talk about today, really, which is this concept of things being in their proper place, and how feminism is a form of subversion. And what we see in the red pill community you've written is that they will complain, my women must take accountability. And that's the typical complaint that we get from what you call manosphere brainwashed men. But by saying that, they reveal themselves to be feminists. Now, why is that? The demand for women to take accountability reveals men to be feminists?
Well, you have to ask yourself one question: do men lead or do they not? And if men lead, or if men are supposed to lead in a healthy society, then if there is a problem, then they must lead in the return back to some kind of normalcy or healthiness in intersexual relationships. And so this is why I think that complaining about women is unbecoming to men, and not the best way forward.
You can see it right back in the story of Adam and Eve in the garden. So Adam emasculates himself first by allowing Eve to be alone with the serpent, not protecting her, and then doubly by blaming her as well. So God blames both Eve and Adam. And the feminist manosphere man who wants to blame women for society's failings when he's supposed to be the one who, as you say, leads, is in much the same situation.
Yeah, I agree completely.
Now, I love the way you've described Western feminism as one big shit test that men in the West just failed. So this is a real oops upside the head point for most guys, because they're quite comfortable talking about this concept of the shit test to find out how strong their masculine frame is. But this is mind-blowing that the whole of feminism was just a big version of that. Now, tell us a bit more about what you mean by that, and how did men fail it?
Well, There's two main aspects to this answer, so I'll try to organize myself. So first of all, I was talking to my friend Ali Drummond about this idea, and she mentioned that feminism is taking credit for things that were actually brought about by the Industrial Revolution, that helped to get not just women but men also, their rights in society and freedoms and all kinds of things. The Enlightenment movement in general, like, it wasn't just about women, it was about all people. And feminism is taking credit for things that it shouldn't be taking credit for. When it comes to the shit test, I think they are unconscious. I don't think women are intelligent or like Machiavellian and sitting by themselves plotting. I think they're judging based on their emotions. And so when they do any kind of shit test, they're actually not aware that they're doing it. And I think that, for example, a normal woman who is not very self-aware, when she gets married or when she has a boyfriend and she asks him to do all kinds of domestic duties around the house, bosses him around, makes him feel like crap, she's actually waiting for him to stand up to her, because when he stands up to her, then she feels more confident that he can stand up to others as well. And she's not doing this consciously, it's unconscious, actually. And so a lot of the things that I say to women through my social media is, making them aware of these tests. It's like, do you really want someone to fail this test? Or like, why are you doing this? And they get very heated when I make them aware of it. So I think, when women ask for the right to vote or like the right to go to work, I think like those things apply when a woman is disenfranchised, but it's not in all cases. It's not in the general case, at least.
Yeah, this is an interesting point about pushing to see if there'll be pushback. And this is going to be outrageously offensive to some people, but you even see this with what some dog trainers talk about, where if there isn't a strong leader in the household, and the dog will figure that out and keep testing. And if there's a power vacuum, then the dog will want to be the one that rises to the top, because that's how nature works. And I think of feminism as being very much a response to a male power vacuum. So when the man is weak,
Yeah.
the woman ends up having to take that role and resents it, because deep down she has a natural inclination to want strong leadership. And to the extent that the man is weak, she has to become herself more masculine, and then this is a role that she's not by nature made for, and then resents the man for having to shoulder that extra load.
Mm-hmm. You've said it so well, because if you imagine the situations where women having these feminist values would be beneficial. A woman who doesn't have a father would benefit from being able to own property, to get a job, to be able to do all of these masculine roles that traditionally her father would do for her, or her husband. But if there are good men around, she generally wouldn't need to do those things. Similarly, it goes the other way as well. When a man doesn't have women in his life, he ends up doing a lot of the feminine roles for himself because he has to. And so, I think that it's the atomization of society has definitely contributed to a lot of these issues, because we just default assume that everyone will have no family, no friends, no relationships around to help shoulder the burdens of life, so that each person can focus on their natural strengths rather than becoming everything all the time. And I think this has contributed to the justification for a lot of these bad ideas.
Yeah, I like that point about atomization, because people have forgotten that being male or being female biologically is a calling to a different self-sacrificial social role. So it means something. The biological facts actually mean something about what we are aimed at. It's a particular role within a family, and men and women are complementary. They're not interchangeable. So a child needs a mother and a father. They have different jobs to do as the head and the heart of the home. And you can't just take them out and plug and play them in all sorts of different arrangements. And on that note, you've written that modern feminism is the most misogynistic thing in existence. And I made a similar point in the lecture I was sacked for. So it made me chuckle when I saw that you've written the same thing on Twitter. This is something that most people think sounds absurd on face value. What? Feminism? Misogyny? So tell me how you arrived at this conclusion, and let's see if it dovetails with what my reasoning process was.
So I was considering the benefits of feminism and how it might have improved the lives of women, because that's the explicit goal of it. Of course, the dictionary definition is equality for men and women, but I don't believe that that's the accurate definition, because even the word itself, feminism, begins with a woman. So it's not otherwise it would just be called egalitarianism. I think that if we just go through point by point and consider what it has offered to women, let's think about it. It's told them that they have to get a career at the same pace and timings that a man does, because they can. So it encourages them to, when I see feminist movements play out in real life, I see women pushed into STEM fields that don't necessarily want to be there, or being encouraged to prioritize their careers in their 20s rather than starting a family, which makes them miserable, because most women, 90% of them, do want families. And so if they postpone it until their 30s, they find they have trouble with fertility, or they have trouble attracting someone who wants to be with them, because they have lost that ability to depend on someone else, not just financially, I mean emotionally as well. They're so used to being in their bubble, working all the time. And when you're working nonstop, it's not just that you're making more money. Like, it's not the money aspect that makes you unattractive. It's the fact that you are constantly in work mode, and you can't relax and have fun and be cheerful and full of ease and joy. That is the beauty of femininity. And I think they also push themselves into jobs that particularly destroy that aspect, finance, law, medicine. Not that these jobs should not be available to women to do, but it's a lie to say that they have not always been available. Actually, there have been female lawyers, doctors, etc., even before feminism was invented. Another way that feminism is misogynistic, misogyny is basically a hatred of women, or doing something that is negative to women based on that hatred. I won't speak on the current LGBT stuff with trans women. Like, I'll stick to the basics. But even things like, if we say that women should have the right to vote, we should consider, why should a woman vote differently than her family? Like, do they have differences in values? It foments the difference in values. It encourages women to be promiscuous. It constantly empowers promiscuity in women. And I have like a whole essay on this, where it's basically take every vice that women may have, and it encourages that vice instead of encouraging women to pursue their virtues. So, for example, when women post revealing pictures of themselves, that could be considered the vice of vanity. And if you say anything against that action, you are called a sexist, when actually it is just speaking about the vice itself. It's not about the fact that it's a man or a woman. Or if you consider if a woman's not hired for a role, or if she's not selected to present, feminism encourages women to blame it on sexism rather than on their skill set, or whether or not they're suitable. And the last point is, it's misogynistic because I went to a women in STEM conference once, and I was permitted to present because I was a woman, and I found that to be extremely insulting. Like, I did it, and then afterwards it just left a bad taste in my mouth, and I was thinking about why that was, and it's because they didn't consider that I was the best scientist or had the best project. They just considered the fact that I was a woman. And it's like you're in like a Special Olympics category, instead of just being treated as, oh, this is just a scientist, or this is just a writer. You're put on this, oh, best female writers of the year. It's like, why am I on the female list if if I have just as much if I have just as much quality as any other writer, male or female? We should be able to collapse the difference and just not have that extra category. So I think that insult is also quite misogynistic.
Yeah, very similar thoughts to what I had. And I came to the conclusion that the deepest form of misogyny that feminism involves is really telling women that they become valuable or powerful only to the extent that they live like men. And you can even see that at the first feminist convention in Seneca Falls in 1848, where the explicit aim was throwing off wifely obedience. And at the heart of it is really this antipathy towards domesticity and the role of homemaker and mother in particular. But that is the real core of what it means to be a woman. If we're thinking the philosophical reality of what womanhood is, which is the potential for motherhood. This is why no trans woman is a woman, because that potential is never there. And once you shift away from that and start saying it's a career, or it's your sense of fashion or your cosmetics, then any deluded man can put his hand up and say, well, guess what, babe? I'm a woman too, because I can do all that.
And I love that you said it insults every natural quality about a woman whenever she embraces it. So women are never put on feminist magazines, or like, celebrating feminist women if they are stay-at-home moms who do a really amazing job looking after their children or homeschooling their children. They're never celebrated if they, if they had 10 kids. They're never celebrated for that kind of thing. Or if they are very nurturing and caring toward their families, or all of these qualities of domesticity that are not rewarded by money. It seems that's why I'm convinced that feminism came out of a form of a negative side of capitalism that only really values human beings insofar as they can generate capital. Capitalism should stay in the economy section, and it shouldn't seep into the social section. But I think whenever it does seep into the social aspects of life, it has really negative consequences for society. And feminism is one of those consequences. And it just tells women that if you aren't behaving like a man, then you're not really an admirable woman, and you're oppressed, or you're just, you're not good enough.
Yeah, that's it. So few people see this clearly. So it was really refreshing to me to see that a woman was articulating it with the passion and clarity that you were. I think that's a very rare thing, and the message needs to be out there. So your line was that feminism was the fundamental error of women being convinced that they do not have power unless they behave like men. And you kind of hinted at your thoughts on my next question, which is, what does make women powerful? If we've got any young women listening to this thinking, okay, I can see the problems with feminism. I know what kind of dead ends some people I know have gone down. What should I do instead? Where do you think true feminine power resides?
So if you want to learn this properly, and delve deep into it, you need to read the old fairy tales, the way they were written in the past. You need to look at Arthurian legends and realize the role of a woman is very quiet in these stories, but it's at the same time, it's the center of the story. It's like the sun of the story. You know, a man in these stories has immense physical power, economic power, maybe. He is powerful in the physical realm, but he doesn't get that orientation that tells him, or that the woman for a man is a compass that tells him how to use that power and where he should focus his attention, that would make his life honorable, that would ennoble him. So a great example of this is the poem called The Hapless Knight by Pushkin, where the knight is, you know, it's an allegory for the Virgin Mary within that poem, but it describes this knight who didn't know what to do with himself until he found this maiden, and she inspired him to do great things just with her presence. And so the ability to inspire a man to do great things is itself an unspoken and immaterial power that women have in the world. I was even reading today for, you know, in preparation for my literature class that I teach, a passage from Antoine Saint-Exupéry's Wind, Sand, and Stars, where a man, he was an airline pilot who crashed in the middle of a mountain covered in snow and was, you know, on the precipice of death. And yet, for some reason, when the embrace of, you know, the warm embrace of death was very near and he could have just closed his eyes and let go of all his suffering and agony, he decided instead to keep going. And I was so astonished when I read that, because the thing that he thought when he opened his eyes was, what will my wife do when I'm gone? Who will take care of my wife and my children? And he got up and he kept walking, and it was incredible. And this is based on events from Antoine Saint-Exupéry's life, like that he obviously romanticized for the story. But these are the things that I think a lot of women don't realize, that they can give hope and inspiration. And these are immaterial things that give you power. It's not just beauty. It's not just the fact that someone wants to sleep with you or have children, not just those material benefits that evolutionary psychologists talk about. I think there's an immaterial spiritual aspect as well, that the presence of a good and virtuous woman in your life can inspire you to greatness.
That's really beautifully put. And it reminds me of a story that I was reading to my kids a while back called The Last Unicorn by Peter Beagle. There's a really good animation of it, which was quite a dark kids animation from the 80s, but the novel's much better. And the hero explains to the princess, whose name is Lady Amalthea, he says, I never looked at you without seeing the sweetness of the way the world goes together, or without sorrow for its spoiling. I became a hero to serve you and all that is like you. So this is the idea that, as expressed in Greek myth, without Andromeda chained to the rock, Perseus is just going to fly by and the heroism isn't called forth. So the idea that the feminine adds the touch of the transcendent to a man's life. And for me anyway, loving my wife and our family was my road towards Christianity, and that was the path that took me there. And this is the same thing for many men, as expressed in so much love poetry throughout the Western world and elsewhere.
Yeah, in this love poetry, yes, of course you get some, you know, men extolling the beauty of a woman in the lyrics, but I think when you read it more carefully, it's about more than her beauty. It's about a sense of virtue that she embodies, that gives him hope in the world, that gives him something to fight for. I think that's the crucial aspect. And I think if women focus themselves on becoming their most virtuous version of themselves. And I think that's why the childishness is also so beautiful in a woman. It's because it's not that she's immature or like stupid, like, you know, like a little kid doesn't know a lot about the world. It's that she has that innocence that is often best suited to virtue. And I think if she cultivates these qualities, she will really learn that that men will not just bend over backwards for you because they want something from you in a transactional return. It's because you gave them something to fight for.
Exactly it. The sweetness of the way the world goes together. Now, what makes a high value woman then? You've hinted at a couple of qualities already, but there's a lot of talk about how to be a high value man. Some of it has got some truth in it. I think a lot of it is relatively degenerate though and too materialistic. But what makes a high value woman? In the Twitter thread that was the point of initial contact between us, I was talking about things like not wanting to prioritize career in her early 20s and seeing family as the true vocation, respecting her father, dressing modestly, being chaste, etc. Now, what are your thoughts on this question?
So I approach the question, there's a material aspect and an immaterial aspect to this list that, as you've already alluded to. And the material aspects of the list have been repeated by many people over and over again, and a lot of people have gotten them right. They're kind of basic, you know, for the purpose of procreation. When you acquire a wife, here are the things that you need. I'm not really interested in that list, but the answer is really obvious if you go from that point of view. Like, obviously, if you want to start a family, she should be young, fertile, like as in like healthy, able to take care of kids. She should be beautiful because beauty is a signal for health and fertility. She should be, if she, all of the red flags are basically signs that whether or not she subscribes to leftist philosophy, because that will affect how she raises the children. Things like, but I'm not totally convinced that that list is as useful as they claim it to be, because they have things on there like tattoos, length of hair, eye color, skin color, like, and even figure. And these things matter, but I think they're more of a personal preference to some extent. And also, it ignores the fact that people have companions for their whole life, not just in that first segment of a marriage when you're having children. Like, once you've had the children, you still need to be around that person forever, and they need to be on this path with you. And so that's why, like, I recently made a list too, but it got a lot of it went viral, and then I just stopped looking at it. But yeah, so I tried to focus on immaterial things. And I think what makes a woman high value, health is important, because I believe that physical health corresponds with mental health. And if you're not mentally healthy, you can't be in a good relationship. I think that's just a fact. So physical health, which corresponds to mental health, not being on these drugs like birth control, antidepressants, like marijuana, anything like that. Even like alcohol and stuff, it's like moderated. It's not like overly indulged. And I think that makes sense, one, for the physical health aspect, but also it tells you a lot about whether or not that person is comfortable with their own mind and personality for most of their life, because these are mind-altering substances. Even SSRIs, there's very little evidence that, more and more papers are being published today about how little they actually help with mental health issues. And actually, they correspond more to helping to fix the symptoms caused by as sequelae to birth control. Like, make a Venn diagram of women on birth control and women on SSRIs, it's a circle. And they usually also face insomnia as a sequelae of these drugs, and then they have to take marijuana to fall asleep, and like it's just like a whole vicious cycle. So I think that would be another quality. Another one is that she can make you laugh, and you have the same sense of humor. She can think critically about things in general. I think you can get that from humor, but also from just conversation, because this is the person who's going to raise your children. And if you're constantly worried that, oh, she might do something stupid, or I'll have to explain this to her, like you're not going to be able to trust fully. And I think trust is a form of love. That she is not looking for a fight all the time or belligerent. Like she has self-respect. So she doesn't take, like, if you treat her badly, like for example, like, guys have shit tests too. They don't realize it as well. It's the same. It's human nature. When a man does something to disrespect a woman, like, talking to another girl in front of her, or like insulting her subtly in some way, or like standing her up, if she stands up for herself in that instance and doesn't take it, that actually makes him more attracted to her, and he doesn't realize why. So a woman having self-respect and not taking bad treatment from others, this makes her immensely high quality. And I think that, a lot of women who don't have self-respect, it shows up in every aspect of their life, from their fitness to the way they dress, to the values that they hold. Like, it just pervades all of the other qualities. So I think those are the immaterial ones. What makes a woman like really delightful? I'm actually going to mention, I went to a museum in Florence once, and I found this old lady with her husband there, and she was just like magnetizing. Like, she was talking to him, and just like the sound of her voice and the graceful way that she walked, and she just had this, like, it's like she was floating 2 inches above the ground, the way that she like carried herself. And I have no idea how to describe that quality, but some women just have it. And I think that elegance and grace and playfulness with which you engage with life, like that can make a woman like just a magnetizing person in general. And I think that's something that doesn't decay with age. I think it's a sign of someone who is just at ease with the world and goes with the flow. So these are all the immaterial qualities.
Yeah, that's really well put. It reminds me of a remark I made when I was a kid at school that I got badly told off for, even before political correctness really hit, because I said that women are halfway between children and men, and the teacher hated that. But I think there's some truth to it, and I was onto something when I was a kid then, because it is that sense of playfulness and innocence, not as childlike naivety or stupidity, but being slightly aloof from the dirty working world that men have to spend most of their days in. So when you can keep a distance from that, then there's a special quality to it. Like you say, it's almost as if they're just floating above it. Again, perhaps it's that touch of the transcendent. Now, this doesn't always go to plan, and many women find themselves frustrated, and it comes back to our point we made earlier about feminism as misogyny. There's a really terrible statistic that was publicized relatively recently. EV Magazine is where I saw it. Over 50% of liberal white women under 30 have a mental health problem now. A lot of it is anxiety or depression. What are your thoughts on the reasons for this?
Well, there's two categories of reasons. One is the fact that they're malnourished, and they are depleting their minerals rapidly through drugs such as birth controls, multivitamins, they take SSRIs for that reason, but like they they're usually on plant-based diets because that's popular, and women are more prone to following mainstream ideas without critical thinking. So all of these things kind of deplete their nutrients, and you'd be surprised to find how many people, once they start eating good quality animal fat and they stop taking all of these drugs, they start to feel alive again. So I think that's a major contributor to the statistic. The other one is mimetic. So a lot of these problems that they are calling depression and anxiety, or any other mental health issue, it's kind of just absorbed from their environment, and it's not real in the same way that mineral deficiency could be real. And this is, there's a scene from Chuck Palahniuk's it's what Lullaby, that's the book. And he's talking about this one character who reads the DSM-5, and every day he diagnoses himself with a new disease because he's read the disease in the book. And I think women do that a lot because of the internet. You have all these people talking about mental illness and mental health, and they convince themselves that they have a disease that they don't, just because we pathologize everything. Even normal, ordinary emotions, we tend, in the modernized world, people tend to pathologize them rather than just work through them as something that as a natural response to life. So I think that those are the two qualities.
That's really important. It reminds me of a thought I had earlier when you were mentioning depression. When Christ is offered pain relief on the cross, he turns it down, wanting to experience every last drop of sorrow. And I think there's a reluctance in not just men, but women as well, to face suffering, face unhappiness as a fact of life, because one of the many liberal delusions is the idea that we're supposed to be happy the whole time. So one of my traits of a high value woman would be someone who accepts that there are going to be difficult times, but sometimes that's where you find the meaning, and not always trying to escape that. Now, even if we do get to the point where the woman is able to become, as is fashionably termed now, a trad wife, you've said that there's a danger here often, which is that women who think they have traditional values, when you ask them to do 100% of the domestic chores, their feminism suddenly comes out.
Yeah.
Why does it suddenly come out when that request is made?
I don't know, actually. Like, I've just experienced it when I mention it. And it's not in my real life, only on Twitter or social media. Because in my real life, I was privileged to be raised by two parents who love each other very much, and they grew up in a very different time and place. They don't even know the word trad, but they embody, like my mom, my sister-in-law, my grandmothers, my aunts, they're all embodied these things. They live this way. They're not even aware of it. It's just the default mode setting for them. So when I repeat things that they do or they say, it's like heresy for the internet. Like the fact that men don't change diapers, like for the internet, it's like, oh my God, how could you say that? Like, that's so oppressive. Do you even have children? Blah, blah, blah. It was just like so shocked that something so normal would be considered so controversial to them. And I realized it's because a lot of them were not raised in the same way that I was. And so they kind of are coming to these same ideas that we agree on, but they haven't incorporated them with the same level of depth that someone like my mom has, because for her, that's the only setting. There's no other setting. And my mom's a businesswoman. She has her own business. She's very intelligent and educated, and yet she is like fully traditional in every way as well. Or even when I mentioned that, oh, here are the ways that we can prevent stretch marks in pregnant women. I got a lot of, it was so mysterious to me why I got so much hatred for that, because I think they are still very much in the modernized culture, modernized Western culture that is very decadent. And so they are so used to leftist thinking that even if they've turned over a few uh, opinions, they haven't integrated the values completely.
Yeah, I think that's the right way to put it. So it's a surface level phenomenon, and the deep rooted feminism and liberalism hasn't actually been pulled out yet. And you can actually end up with some quite dangerous situations where somebody likes the aesthetic of what they see as a kind of consumerist lifestyle choice almost. So pull your trad live action role playing scenario down from the shelf of possible lifestyles, but you're not actually willing to do what that involves, and you get a terrible conflict. And you've said that if we leave this surface level problem created by feminism unchecked, so if we don't address the underlying spiritual ones it involves, then this could lead to a dangerous better patriarchy, patriarchy, and spiritually deprived men and women. I think that's spot on. And again, so few people are saying this. Now, what are the underlying spiritual ones then? How do we find them and how do we uproot them?
It's such a difficult question to answer. It's something that I felt, but I didn't quite know why or how I knew it. Um, if we think about, you know, the women who might be realizing that their life isn't going the way they want, or they don't want to be 35 and alone, like, trying to freeze their eggs or something, like they might take on the trad persona, like you said, pull it off the shelf. But then if they only understand it at a superficial level, they'll only kind of treat themselves as like a prostitute, because they'll only do yeah, that's it. They'll treat what should be a holy union and treat it like a prostitutional transaction, where man goes to work, makes money, brings it home. Woman takes money, buys clothes, has babies. It's just a transaction between them. There's no actual love there. There's no understanding, or there's no like bond, you know? And so I think that is the danger. It's that you will have everything fulfilled on the superficial level, but not at the deeper level. And I think we can look at a lot of societies where this does happen. For example, in India today, there are a lot of women who are disenchanted with the traditional lifestyle because they don't have those spiritual needs met. So they are married at very young ages, in arranged marriages, and they are fulfilling each of their respective roles as husband and wife as their society mandates. But because the men are never called to become men, they don't have those rites of passage, that inhere in society. They don't inspire respect, submission, and obedience from their wives. They just do it because they feel that they have to and they have no other choice. It's kind of like being under a tyrant rather than a king. And so I think that's the difference. Like, are you, is the woman respecting and obeying and loving her husband because she's inspired to, or is she doing it because she feels desperate? She has no other choice. She'll be destitute without him, or because, she feels that it's socially improper for her to be any other way. So I think that is the spiritual element that will always be missing if we ignore it, and then the pendulum will keep swinging back and forth between extreme feminism and extreme subjugation of women. Like, we won't be able to land in that happy place where people are actually fulfilled by their relationships.
Yeah, I think you're onto something really important there, which is why we're seeing the attraction to the idea of multiple wives coming up again. So people will point to somebody like Andrew Tate, and you've got this idea of, well, I'll have multiple wives and I'll tell them all to make me sandwiches all day, because that's what men do, and the woman has to do what she's told. But the truth of it is that marriage as two becoming one flesh gives a level of spiritual unity and harmony that multiple wives doesn't achieve, because you've always got that problem that the man's attention to the women is divided among them, whereas their attention towards him is single. So that's the asymmetry, whereas monogamy corrects that.
I
You've
think that
also,
comes from, sorry to interrupt. I
yeah,
just like don't want you to lose the thought. But that comes from the Western idea of primordial mitosis that doesn't exist in a lot of Eastern cultures. So it's the idea that, you know, before you came on Earth, you were one soul that was split in two, and it's only when you get married that you are whole again. So that idea doesn't exist in many Eastern cultures. So I think that's why anyone who is raised in the Western tradition would not be able to understand or reconcile why they would even be able to think of that as a viable marriage, like multiple wives, for example. And so I personally subscribe to that idea as well, and that's why, you know, I believe in monogamy. But I think that's where the difference comes from.
interesting. I hadn't heard that before, right? And one of your tweets that really made me laugh was, if you have to tell your wife, or these guys aren't even married, most of them, tell your woman, as they put it, to make you a sandwich, then you're not really alpha. Because if you're truly inspiring her, she'll just make you one, because that's what she wants to do without being told to.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a funny self-own by Tate and others. The true alpha doesn't have to ask for a sandwich. He just gets one presented to him. Good takeaway point for all the teenage Tate fans. So to circle back to our beginning then, the root solution to feminism, you say, is fixing men. Why is this? Fixing
Um,
men.
I think I touched on it in the beginning, like because the men lead and the women follow. So if more and more young men are intolerant toward women's bad behaviors, if they are gentle and charming in the way that they explain the flaws with leftist thinking, you know, they're not afraid to mansplain, but mansplain in a kind and I think men have to be teachers in society to a large extent. So you know, if you a lot of these guys on social media, they like are in a super rage, and you can understand why nobody listens to them, especially not women. You have to be charming and kind and patient like a teacher. And so if they are that way, um, then I think more and more women will follow suit. And I think that women also respond a lot to the energy of the man that they're around. So if he's very charming and very patient and doesn't tolerate bad behavior at all, like she will align to his way of being. And that is true for the majority of women. I think there's, you know, some percentage that would that would take a lot more work, but I think for the majority, they would be more than happy. And you can see it. Sometimes I laugh to myself because I have some cousins who are, you know, verbally when they talk about things, and some friends, they are very feminist in their ideas. But then when I see how they behave in their lives, they're very traditional with their husbands or their fiancés. And I just like keep it to myself, but it makes me laugh and it makes me realize how the energy of a man is what is what leads a woman the most. And so I think that's why that's the solution. And the safer and happier and more cherished a woman feels in a relationship, the less likely she is to because feminism, it appeals to women in the same way that a lot of these Ponzi schemes appeal to people, because it makes them feel scared. First, it targets them by making them scared. Like, what if you're on the street by yourself? Do you not want to be able to make money? What if you're this? What if you're that? And this is how this movement is protecting you from all of these things. So it's taking on the role of what the man should be doing. So if he makes her feel safe, secure, cherished, protected, then like she's less vulnerable to these kinds of propaganda.
Yeah, exactly. And this also affects fertility as well. So many of these women who think they're infertile, if they actually end up feeling safe, protected, secure, very often they find themselves conceiving because their body's telling them it's safe now. You can have a child. So these guys who might be thinking, unless I marry someone who's 20, there's no way we can have a child. No, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
If you take the steps to create the right space for her to flourish, then you will have the results that you want. So you've written that femininity can only exist in the protection of masculinity. So I want to finish with just a few tips on what you think men should be doing if they want to attract a feminine, high value woman like the kind that you've outlined. My thought on this is derived from one of Emerson's insights. He said that the soul of reform is reform of soul. And there's so many men complaining about what's wrong with the world, what's wrong with society, what's wrong with women. But what I like about your message is stop doing that, focus on yourself, and then be more masculine, and then you will start to attract the kind of woman that you want deep down. So reform of soul. But how do men go about that?
I think if they learn to take on burdens without complaining about them, I think that will transform a lot of people. There's that famous poem by Rudyard Kipling, If, and it has a lot of amazing lines in it. But there's also, I love Wind, Sand, and Stars, my favorite book by Antoine Saint-Exupéry. It also has a lot of examples of how to do that. So not being resentful of the burdens you have in life and taking them on with good humor and not complaining about them. So that's doing it nobly. I think that will make them happier, and then they will attract the kind of girl who they want, because no one wants to be around some angry, like, bitter person.
Yeah, that's key. So if guys ask me about what they can do to improve their relationships, marriages, whatever it might be, one thing that's really useful is don't complain and don't show that kind of weakness in front of your wife, because it's going to make her have a lower estimation of you. It's showing that you're someone who is struggling or perhaps even resenting the burden that you're carrying for her. So gratitude is always the most important thing to cultivate, even if it's for your job. Gratitude that you've got a way of providing.
And also, like like a fire in your soul. I think that also makes the man really attractive, because if he has fire, he's not afraid to be an asshole when it's needed. He's not afraid. He doesn't make excuses, but he's like, has plans, and he takes action quickly, and he goes out and gets what he wants from his life. Like that kind of vitality and virility, that is extremely attractive, because women are generally more meek anyway. They have a harder time standing up for themselves. When they find themselves with a man who has no problem standing up for not only himself, but for others when it's necessary, that's very attractive, because then okay, well, I don't always have to keep defending myself. Like, he can do this for me. Like even small things like planning things out and taking initiative, like, oh, let me take you here, I think you would love it. Not putting the burden on her to take that leadership role in small things, or not being afraid to be, you know, a little bit of an asshole when it's necessary. It's saying no, like having standards in life, like that is, I think all those things attract the right kind of girl toward you.
Those are all really excellent tips. Thanks so much. And ones that people probably won't hear many other places. So this has been really great to talk to you. And I'd encourage everyone to go and have a look at Mega's Substack. I'll put a link to that in the pinned comment, and to keep an eye out for her future work. You also have some courses that people can take on things like how to write well, and also some things about appreciating painting and poetry. Is that right?
Yes, so I teach two different courses. One is an art history, it's called my art club, where we talk about art history every week on Mondays. And it's really, really fun because you don't just talk about the art, you talk about the philosophy of the society around it that enabled people to create such magnificent works of art. And I think coming to terms, I think recognizing what genius looks like again can help us recalibrate our tastes for the present, and teach us a lot of things that the arts in the present don't really teach us. And my other class is on literature. So if you're, if you want to read more classical literature, but you never get around to reading it, so we discuss snippets of it every week. And that way people can also use that to improve their own writing.
Excellent. So we've got Substack, art history, and also classic literature. Great to talk to you, and hope to speak to you again one time.
Thanks for inviting me. Have a
You're
great day.
welcome. You too.